Hello, welcome to Something Wicked. My name is Barry and today I'm going to be making this horrible little thing. It's taken from a 16th century book called Della Transmutazione Metallica Sogni Tre, which translates as Three Dreams on the Transmutations of Metal. Now, as you can see, it's a pretty weird book, and that's because it's a book on alchemy, which is pretty bloody weird when you dip your toe into it. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to learn a bit more about alchemy while I show you how I made this strange little beastie. Anyway, on with the build. As always, we're going to start by creating an armature for our little man, and this time we're going to be using some thick gauge aluminium crafting wire. Now, our guy is a bit of a weird shape, so the armature will be as well. We've got to get 3 necks with 3 heads on them and a very long tail, which is all quite complicated. But once that's plumbed in, we can use thin wire to give the clay something to bind to later on. Once we've packed out the armature with tin foil, we'll cover the whole thing in clay and then we can start shaping up his bod. In creating the body, we start to reveal some of the secrets that are hidden within the original engraving. For example, the body is actually the shape of a retort, which is an alchemist's tool for boiling and distilling stuff. Next up, it's time to make his face. So this grumpy bugger is a guy called Hermes Trismegistus, who's kind of like the patron of alchemy and astronomy. He's actually a combination of 2 gods, the Egyptian god Thoth and also the Greek god Hermes. And there are references to both of those characters throughout the piece, as you can see from the boots at the bottom of his legs. So I've made him a nice pair of Crocs. I've added a few details. I'm not going to add the wings at the back yet because I'll just end up knocking them off when I'm doing the rest of his body. I added these ridges up the front. They're not in the original engraving, but I thought they looked pretty good. And then I set about cutting out a load of scales and covering the rest of his body in those. Now the tail is said to represent the smoke rising out of the alchemist's retort. It interacts with the heads at the top of the image, knotting around the necks of the first and the second one, but being held gently in the mouth of the third. Now we're going to find out what all that stuff means later on in the video, but for now we're going to pack out the base of his tail, shape it up with some ridges, and then roll a long noodly appendage to act as the rest of the tail. Now our guy's pretty greedy for wings. There's the wings on the back of his boots, there's the wings on his sides, and then there's the wings behind his ears. Once they're finished, we'll slop them onto the side of his face and then we can start working on his hip wings. We'll twizzle some wire, which we're going to cover in heat shrink, which we're then going to shrink with some heat. Cos clay is going to serve as the flappy bit on the wing. And once I've shaped that up, I'll glue it down and then we can drill into the side of the model so that we can fix the wings in place. Next up, Hermes Trismegistus's beard. Okay, so the next bit is where stuff starts to get deep. You see, the 3 heads at the top of the image are absolutely chock full of symbolism. They represent something called the 3 primes, where 2 opposite components are brought together to create a third. Now materially, the heads represent salt, sulphur and mercury, but they also represent the moon, the sun and the planet Mercury. So let's get started with the first head, the salt moon eagle thing. Salt represents the body and the material world. The moon, well, she represents transition, change and femininity. And the eagle is just another way of showing the smoke that's rising out of the retort. The important thing to clock is that this head is the opposite of the second head. Because while salt symbolises the body, sulphur symbolises the soul. The moon, well, that was seen to be feminine and transitory, but the sun was said to be masculine and fixed. And this really is alchemy in a nutshell. The study of opposing states: body, soul, base metals, gold, life and death. And it was the attempt to control the transmutation between those states to make a shitload of money and live forever. Which brings us to the third head, Mercury. Now this head is kind of bird-like, so I thought I'd get another Thoth reference in there and turn it into the head of an ibis bird. Now in this image, Mercury represents something called a rebis. It's the result of the whole alchemical process, the unification of opposing qualities into what was sometimes described as the divine hermaphrodite. A knotting together of the first two heads, of spirit and matter, of male and female. That's why the third head is holding its tail gently in its mouth. It's the mother and father of the philosopher's stone. So now I'm going to bake this thing in the oven while you hit the subscribe button, and then we're going to paint it. So to begin with, I mixed fur brown and barbarian flesh together to create this kind of rank orange colour. Then I mixed up a bit of bone white to tickle his face with. Sorry about that. Once that's done, we'll white up his eyes and his beard, before using a flesh tone wash to put some colour in his face, and then we'll dry brush that to bring out some of the detail and take the edge off a little bit. So I used some shining silver to paint up his ear wings and his boots. A dark tone wash was used to bring out some of the detail in the clay, and at around about this point I discovered this crap bit of colouring in from the 1600s. Turns out the body should have been black, and the reason for that is because in alchemy, black represents decomposition, which many alchemists believed was the first step in the pathway to the philosopher's stone. The other thing it showed was that the wings were actually the wings of a peacock. Now, alchemists loved a good peacock, and the reason for that is because it represented something called the peacock phase, which is when you started to see flashes of colour in the retort when you were cooking stuff up. This meant your experiment was working. Either that or you were seeing shit because you've been boiling mercury all day. So in alchemy, black, white and red represent different stages of the alchemical process. As we've discovered, black represented the initial stage of putrefaction and decay. In the next stage, the material was said to turn white, and this represented purification and refinement, where the substance became more physically and spiritually elevated, moving closer to its perfected state. So red signified the final stage, that of coagulation, where the purified material was believed to have achieved its ultimate transformation into the philosopher's stone. That miracle material that could turn lead into gold, could cure you of death, and could provide you with ultimate physical, mental, and spiritual fulfillment. So this is the answer to the riddle. The final head. The sneaky god Thoth that knew the answer all along, holding the recipe to the philosopher's stone in his cheeky little beak. Resplendent in gold and eternal, he is the symbol of ultimate transformation and mastery over nature's elements. Anyway, enough of that guff. On to the money shots.